All right, welcome to the Sci-Fi Express Lane. This is Jeff Carroll, writer, science fiction creator, comic book dude, filmmaker. I'm an actor now, so I just acted in a cyber funk musical, the Blackout Chronicles. You'll hear more about it. It's hitting festivals. Anyway, I'm here talking about a conversation that turned into a panel. As you know, I do comic books. I do them at libraries and bookstores and everywhere. And there was a conversation that evolved into a panel. As you know, there's a lot of children's book festivals out there, and I was invited to be a part of a children's book festival. Now, children's books, they have pictures on every page, and they have a little bit of words. Sometimes they'll have words on one side, a picture on the other, or an overlapping picture with words on top of the picture, right? And sometimes, to some people, they think comic books are the same as children's books. And I kind of have to slow them down and tell them, not only are comic books not just for kids, manga is probably for adults, and a lot of kids read it and parents don't monitor it, and there's a lot of wild themes and adult stuff going on in there that even in American comic books we don't fully touch on. Not saying that kids can't handle it. There's definitely things in those stories that people probably would assume would be for adults. It's definitely behavior that you don't see Captain America doing. So if that's a benchmark, then you have it. Or Superman, how about that? All right, so comic books are sort of different. Not only are they different, even the perception that publishers have, and I spoke about this last time, is different, right? Publishers think it's young people that got to be established. And really, it was young people, but those young people grew up and they're now 30, 40, 50, and 60. And because of that, you have an older comic book audience. And this comic book audience is still pushing the industry in certain regards. So what does that mean for like a children's book festival? Maybe we could call this comic books aren't for kids. Comic books aren't just for kids. Something like that, right? But in reality, that's the truth. Now, there's another element. They think, comic books in the classroom. And as an English teacher at 12th grade, I've taught as low as 7th and helped out on 6th, but I didn't have a 6th grade class. But I've taught 7th, 8th, 10th grade, and now 12th grade, right? So I skipped around. I know the standards and I know the levels that we do. There's no real comic book opportunity. There's no real comic book standard. How do comic books fit into school? How do comic books fit into learning? In the 9th grade, they sometimes have graphic novels, storyboard type deciphering, but those are comic book novelizations of Shakespeare, because many of the books, to be honest, many of the books that sneak into education are old books, right? The new books, you'll find maybe, if there's a writer that wrote a book that is used in the school system that is still alive, it's amazing. Many of those are black, female, maybe even gay writers who come from marginalized groups. And because they were marginalized, now they got fast-tracked to make it into the school system. But that still leaves out comic books, right? How do comic books fit into it? I guess, and this is my conversation with a librarian, on how we was kind of going to do this and pull this off, is that comic books fit into the literacy building. All right, it's kind of how I used it for my son. My son now reads thick fantasy novels. He's not afraid of them books, 500 pages. He just hopes that the story, if it's that long, is real good. But he definitely isn't intimidated by the book side. He just questions if they drag the story out too long. But he'll read a series of books. I think he finished his first series in the 6th grade. 6th grade. I think he finished his first series there. So he's an avid reader. Probably reads better than me. I'm not gonna say probably. He does. My challenge is quieting my mind. So I got to get in a peaceful environment. So I'm a good vacation reader, a day off reader, Sundays reader. So yeah, that's where I'm at. But how does it work with literacy? So how did I get my son to become a good reader? And how did comic books play a role in that? Well, when I was getting into working, I took a job for the health department, and it involved assessing children's development. And we were going to go through the father of the child, and we wanted to do it with fathers who were estranged or mostly coming out of incarceration. And one of the ways we felt that children and fathers could develop a bond with a child they hadn't seen because they were away for a while was through reading them stories and just reading, and then also reading in front of them, like picking up that newspaper. And one of the things that really helped was comic books. The fathers enjoyed the comic books and the kids enjoyed it. Yes, we did read children's books. I'm not going to say it was only comic books, but comic books were the ones that, the fathers were able to read on their own without, the children being around. They got into it. The problem I think the biggest obstacle, not really the problem, is with the stereotype. Reading in general, right? Leisure time. People got to work to make money. So a lot of people that are, I'm not going to say marginalized, lower income, sometimes they work all the time. You rarely see them taking time to do something constructive with their leisure time. Many times it's, watching sports, at the bar. I know that was my parents' generation, at the bar. My generation used to be at the street corner. At night, times when you really, it was really hard to find a job because there was less people working. Who knows? In the evening, 9 to 5, everybody got the job. They got an after work thing. So dudes will go to the after work thing and then come out after that and try to, work somewhere else. Or that's when they would squeeze in their free time. But it even felt like the free time had to be constructive. So reading has really gotten a backseat to a lot of activities. So for people to sit down and not just, read a comic book, but read anything, a magazine or newspaper, or, a book, it seems a waste of time. I remember with me, I am not an avid reader. I am now, but in my 30s, I wasn't. And the only books I have read in my 20s were how-to books. As a man, that's what I read. Because even my leisure reading had to be productive to me making money. Now I'm working class, right? I'm working class. So for comic books, they fall into the damn what you doing with your time, category. It's like watching a movie, and sometimes people feel that movies are more engaging than a comic book would be. I argue that there's two things that you get from the comic book. You get to use your imagination, and if your children, second is if your children see you, they defeat that stigma or battle. They get fuel to battle the stigma, because the stigma's in society that, you know, number one, comic books are for kids, and reading is for corny people, you know, or reading is a waste of time. Whatever's in the back of our head that keeps us from reading, reading in front of your kids gives them, you know, particularly the male children, is battles that, you know, gives them some fuel to battle that stigma. In terms of literacy, it is a hybrid form of reading, because in itself, comic books have pictures and words. So if you don't have to read a big setup description of the planet, of the room, of the world that the story is taking place. Many times the story in the comic book will have a spread, and you get to see everything. And if the narrator tells you, it's really just to give you clarifications in the name of the city or the length and size of it. But in terms of the bright colors, the hustle and bustling of it, you get that from the picture. At least you should. So there's comic books allow for easier reading because it doesn't put so much on your mind. One of the things I could do this with all of them, but I do it faster with comic books, is I can put it down and pick up another one. However, without, with a break in between. The only difference is, like, the comic books have a shorter story, and in terms of getting into the characters, sometimes it takes a couple of books to get into the character, whereas a book is the longer story. Books are longer stories than movies. Books are longer stories than comic books. So in a book, you have chapters and chapters to get to know this character. And, you're learning from the observations of the narrator, of the character's behavior, from the telling of the story, you're getting inside the character's head. Whereas comic books and movies don't always get that, unless you're dealing with like a writing like Peter Parker, and sometimes you get that, but you don't get how he felt the pain. You don't get the emotion of his fatigue unless you show him breathing or he says ouch. And it's not like you're going to keep breathing, you're going to write down another deep breath or another ouch every time. In a comic book, you're not going to get that. So you lose a little bit of that in that medium's story delivery. But in reality, comic books are beautiful for that. So what I did, my son and I, when he was young, I got an Xbox, like 3 or 4 years old, very young. And because of the expanded universe of Halo, I decided to go from the PlayStation that I had when I was in my 20s to an Xbox. And I liked the Xbox game of Halo because the people that played the online game were not so cursy. They weren't using racial terms, and the story itself was you're defending the planet. And I thought that was wholesome, whereas Call of Duty was the one they had on the PlayStation. And it still got more games than Halo, but you were fighting Nazis, you was fighting Japanese people, and it was real derogatory in it. And I just was like, damn, I don't want my son, although you might be defending United States or protecting United States interests, I don't even know if I agree with all United States interests like that to be killing people. And I didn't really like him just killing other people. So that was one factor. Then the other factor was clearly the expanded universe. There's still no significant Call of Duty comic book or novel tie-in. But in Halo, they've had television series, 2 of them. They're rumored to have a movie, that's still coming. But they've had a bunch of comic books, and they have an expanded universe of novels that is rather impressive. So, because he can go from video game to comic book to novel and use the same characters, he won't have to learn another set of characters. That really helped me. And also, I was able to play the game with him. We read the books. I remember he said, the books sat on the shelf till he was in middle school, and then he kind of started knocking those out. But anyway, that's really what I think comic books can do for people. I don't see them usable in the classroom except for supplemental reading, and that's, anything could be used for that. But these kids not going to read anything unless they have to read it. So if you give them comic books like I do, I give away comic books, that's really just to spark their interest. And I do think I got a few of them to do that. But if you was to make it a part of an assignment, it'd be a totally different thing. So I just think comic books are used to build literacy in the world of parent and student learning, not necessarily in the classroom. So that's that. All right, talk to you later. Bye-bye.